Please help me welcome Greg Johnson from the Small House Society. Yay! Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Greg Johnson, and I got involved in this back in 2001. Started something called the Small House Society with a few other people, and it's been around since then, and we've kind of watched the movement grow. And this photo here is the house that I lived in from 2003 to 2009. So for 6 years living in that, and it was completely off the grid and built to look like, well, have you seen these little free library boxes? And you know, those are so artistically done, and usually it's like, it looks just like the house or just like the whatever it's close to. Have you noticed that? So it's the same color and same design. Anyway, that's kind of what this is. Like, it looks like a full-size house, but it's just super small.
How many square feet was that?
That one, I tell people that it was 140 square feet because otherwise they'd be too shocked. But it was 10 by 7, so really like 70 square feet. And most of that was taken up with cabinets, which you'll see in the pictures. So maybe it was like 30 square feet, but it sounds so outrageous, people wouldn't accept it. So anyway, I say, well, it's 140 because it was like 70 downstairs, it's 70 upstairs maybe. Yeah, super tiny. And the materials, it was built with cedar wood to keep bugs and birds away from that. And there's a more close-up there. And you can see that trailer it's on is just 2 wheels, and I think its capacity was probably, you know, like 3,600 pound capacity trailer or something. And the house probably weighed 5,000 pounds or something because it's all wood and metal and stuff. So, all right, so this is kind of the presentation outline as I go through these points, and I'll sort of speed through some of it unless somebody says, oh, tell me more about that, but otherwise I'll just kind of keep the pace going. And basically it's kind of the background, history, and context of how I got interested in tiny houses, and then briefly kind of my story of what I've been through with living in a tiny house and helping others, some of the challenges of tiny living, and the benefits of tiny living, and sort of how I see this movement kind of continuing to grow. So we've talked about personalizing the presentation, and then the context. So really for me, and probably I think this is a common experience for everybody, you know, growing up, I was introduced to tiny houses in, you know, kids' books, right? You know, these story books, and there's a tiny house in the woods, and like you see that and think, oh, that is cool, you know, whether it's the Three Bears or whoever. It just seems cozy. And then, you know, as kids playing in tree houses and forts and things like that was always an interesting experience. And then later on taking vacations and going on vacations to, you know, off-the-grid homes. And that was considered to be like, if you had just 2 weeks a year and you're going to spend just a little bit of savings that you had saved up to go on a vacation, what would you do? And I thought, you know, if that's what we're doing when we have the freedom to do that, why don't we just live that way all the time? Like, if that's what we enjoy, let's just be on vacation all the time, live in a cabin all the time, have a wood stove or whatever. And then it was in 2000, there was a full-page front cover story in the Des Moines Register about Jay Schaefer, and it showed his tiny house. And that was the first time I'd ever seen anything like that. And I just thought, that is so quirky and weird, like this professor, instructor at the University of Iowa living in this house. And he bought a home in Iowa City and then immediately rented that home out, put his own house in the backyard. And so basically the rent was more than paying his mortgage. So he was getting a house for free, property for free, extra cash every month, a place to live for free in this tiny house that he built. And it was like, wow, that's pretty amazing. So the other people who've been doing things like that, where they buy a regular home, they might even live in the tiny house and keep fixing up the home. You know, so anyway, that's sort of this background and context, briefly. And oh, the other thing is, I put down here, show of hands, what's your reason? You know, there are lots of different reasons to live small, and it's interesting because depending on the person's reason for living small, I might have different suggestions or comments or something. So how many people are thinking about the environment and like having a smaller footprint? Oh, good. And financial, like, oh, save money, okay. And then efficiency, like everything's within hand's reach. And then sometimes people want temporary, like you want an extra house, maybe one that you can have by a lake or something. Or anybody thinking of it as a second house or temporary house? Not so much. little bit.
That'd be cool.
Yeah, and then the mobility factor, being able to move it. You know, we don't think about it as much here, I think, in Iowa, but, you know, you hear about these fires in California and 2 million people without electric and, you know, and it's either fires or tornadoes or these floods. We've seen massive flooding. So and then hurricanes, and, you know, it's just a mess. So most people would have enough forewarning, because like you hear, oh, in 3 days this hurricane's going to be here, or oh, the river's starting to rise, or these fires are coming. Like, you usually know a couple days in advance, so you could just like hook up your house to a truck and you keep your investment and you're still living, you're not displaced, you're not disrupted. So that's kind of a big one, I think. And some people want to be able to live in, well, whether it's Los Angeles or San Francisco or something, or even just, you know, Cedar Rapids or Iowa City. Like, the place where we live now, we're not buying a home there because the homes are like, a little teeny ranch style house is like $800,000, you know. So, but we wanted to be there because of the bus route, because my wife works at the university. So it's like there are reasons we wanted to be in that spot. And anyway, that's something people encounter. It's like there's a place where they want to live and they can't live there unless they live in a tiny house. So urban. But other people say, no, I want to be out in nature. And there again, like if you want to have a nice house in the woods, it's not too easy to construct something out in the middle of nowhere. It's easier just to bring it in on a truck and then you have your house out there. And then home ownership. You know, some people want to buy a home. I was just looking because I wanted to get fresh notes for this. And today I was looking at the Tumbleweed Tiny House Company website, and they were showing like, buy your home in 15 years, and it's like $500 a month, you know. So it's like amazing, you know, somebody who couldn't afford like a big house payment. And those 30-year mortgages, you know, you're paying interest the whole time. So like, let's say it's a $150,000 home, but then the interest you pay out is $150,000. So you might sell that home for $300,000 and you think, I doubled my money, but not really, because it was, you know, between the principal, the interest, and then all the money you put into maintenance, you lose money on those big homes. So everybody kind of relates to all those, pretty much? Lots of nods? Okay. And at the bottom here I say, you know, there are exceptions to these, like, but I'm looking at who is best suited for small living, or who do we see kind of gravitating toward it. And young people, certainly college people, they don't have a lot of stuff. They don't have, hi there.
Hi. Hello.
And they don't have, you know, career that they're trying to keep up with. So young people and seniors, I talked to a lot of folks. There were some nuns who wanted some of these as retreat homes, like hermitages. And at, what's the place that's...
Prairie Woods.
Yes, Prairie Woods. They have some of these. And so, but yeah, seniors or people that are going on retreats. And then people who are single, maybe they don't have as much need for space. And then the tiny houses, you can see them everywhere. I've seen some pictures of like, there's a tiny house and it's on 1,000 acres in Montana, you know, like they're just out in the middle of nowhere. But in general, I think it's kind of nice to live in like a college town or a walkable community or a small town, just where you can like have your tiny house and then you can walk to the grocery store, you can walk to the breakfast restaurant and the coffee shop and the laundromat. So like it's all stuff you don't have to have in your house because you can just walk and go get it. So your house is kind of like the neighborhood you're in, you know. But if you're out in the middle of Montana, well then you probably have to have an extra room for, you know, an exercise machine or whatever. But college towns are really well suited because, you know, everybody's living in dorms. You have thousands of people basically living in tiny houses. And so all around them are these facilities to accommodate that. And then climate. I've enjoyed them even when it was like 30 below zero. You know, you put a little bit of heat on and you're good to go right there with a tiny house. But in general, if you're going to be walking around, or, you know, you see a lot of these tiny houses in San Diego or places where the weather's really nice, and then people, they really just, they're in their home to sleep at night, and then in the morning it's nice weather, they go out and walk around and do what they need to do. So anyway, those are just kind of some points about who's best suited, and this addresses really kind of challenges that people might face if they're not in those categories. So, and I'm going to skip through this because it seems like everybody here is not necessarily beginners. Everybody's kind of thought this through, you know. But like, and previously I said, oh, seniors are ideally suited. Now I'm saying seniors aren't. But the people with accessibility issues, this is a problem. And you can build a tiny house specifically to your needs, like whatever your needs are. You could give it a wider door. You could make it to where a wheelchair could fit in there. You could set it up, perfectly. But in general, like the turnkey purchase a home, they're not quite accessible. Hobbyists, if you have, I know people, they have like a whole room with these amazing, like big sewing machines that do darning or quilting or something, I don't know. But whatever that hobby is, you need a grand piano, whatever, that's not gonna fit in a 10 by 7 tiny house. So there needs to be, maybe you have a studio someplace, maybe you share a space, but somehow that has to be addressed. My business is tech stuff, and I can fit my whole office in a backpack, so that worked okay. But for other people, if their business is like lawn care, they're gonna need a place to put all their lawn care gear. So that could be an issue. Parents, if you have like 3, 4 kids, these are really popular videos on YouTube. You'll see, oh, this couple has 3 kids and they live in a tiny house. And they might have also, pet owners, yeah, there we go, with big dogs. So like they have 3 big dogs and 5 kids, and they all live in this little house, and they make it look like, oh, this is no problem. But I think there'd be some challenges there, So, because the dogs are going to want to run and the kids want to play. So, yeah. And caretakers, a lot of people that are living at their parents' home, or their parents that are taking care of their kids in later years. There's lots of those situations where you might need more space than just 10 by 7. And then rural or wilderness, I mentioned that. Like you're going to want to have like maybe an extra pantry. If you get snowed in, you want to have the provisions you need. And probably more dependent on kind of off the grid solar and stuff. And then cooking. And some people like to have a big kitchen and lots of food around. And so that it's not like you can't live in a tiny house if these are a situation, but it's just more challenging. So anyway, wanted to mention that. And so my story, which I'm not going to go into a lot of detail there, but just basically, I connected with Jay Schaefer, attended a meeting, and then after that meeting, I was telling these people, I said, somebody should start like some kind of organization for tiny houses, and they started laughing, and I was like, what's so funny? And they said, well, we actually thought you could do that, So, because I was into web stuff, and they're like, you could build a website and do this. So we had, 12 people who were part of the Small House Society, and it was kind of a joke, because like, who wants a small house? It would be like, I don't know, but it's not a joke anymore, I guess. So, and then after starting the organization, I thought, well, if I'm involved with this, I should really be living in a tiny house. So Jay, I helped a little bit, but in the summer of 2003, for a couple of months, we built that house that you saw at the start there. And things just kind of fell in place. Like we didn't give it a lot of thought, but it just worked out. So we went to Coralville, Iowa, and in Coralville, there's this lawn care business, but they also have storage. And we asked them, hey, can we build a house out in your driveway? But they were really nice. We just said, we need like a storage thing that we'll spend $60 a month on. We're going to put lumber in there, we're going to put the tools in there, and then during the day we're going to come over and just kind of do some work. And they said, as long as you're not in the way, no problem. So we were able to build a house over 2 months, and it was nice because we had perfect cement to work on, so if you drop a nail, you don't step in it in the grass or something. And that experience made me realize, the best place to build a house isn't always where you eventually want the house. Yeah.
Did you have any prior experience with architecture and/or construction prior to building your house?
No, I none. And then Jay is this art teacher at the university, so I went to this artist and I said, oh yeah, build me an artistic house. So, but it that also fell in place because we realized, well, let's see, we need a floor, So, like he put down this sheet metal first, and then insulation, and then wood foundation for the house to be built on, and then we built the walls and lifted those up and set them in place and had holes for the windows, and he got some windows from like Habitat Restore. Yep.
You still have to comply with all the local codes.
Well, that's interesting. So if it was on a foundation, and I'll go into that a little more depth, but yeah, if it's on a foundation, you do have to comply with the codes. And that's maybe a good thing just because you want homes to be safe, you want them not to be catching on fire or something, but if it's on wheels like this one was, nobody cares, really. So that was helpful in our case. So then I went ahead and lived from the August of 2003, because my lease was up. I'd been living in a 10 by 12 room, like a lot of graduate students would, you know, you get this room in upstairs of a house, and there were like other people renting rooms, and the bathroom was shared. And this older couple that was running this house, and this wasn't that long ago, but it was $260 a month. That covered heat, electric, air conditioning. They even came in and like replaced toilet paper, soap. It was sort of like being in a hotel. They took such good care. But anyway, so after a couple of years living like that, I moved into this. And here, I'll go to the next, just to show you. So, you know, that was the space. Because I thought, it seemed sort of tiny, 10 by 7. I was living in 10 by 12. But I thought, you know, I could probably make that work. And then I wouldn't have to pay this enormous $260 a month housing cost, you know.
Enormous.
Yeah, to me seemed enormous. And while I was living there, I wrote this book, which I'm going to send some copies to the library, and then maybe write your name on the sheet if you're interested in the book. I sell it, but you know, this is the thing, and I'll mention later in the presentation, but I was on this tour from Canada to Mexico, doing stop-by-stop meetings with people in California and showing people Jay's homes. I was sort of you know, promoting the book and doing that. And so I was trying to get people interested in the book. And this one woman, she was saying, well, no. And I said, well, how about I just give you the book? And she was like, no. I was like, well, why, you won't take the book if I give it to you? And she's like, well, I read it, and then, you know, it said to like get rid of everything, so now I don't want anything. Wow. And so a lot of these people, there's so many copies of this book on Amazon now. At the end of the book, it's like, oh, I'm gonna get rid of the book. You know? So anyway, so now the price, it used to be $12, now you can get it for like $3. But anyway, so these other points were just like after living there and writing the book, and there was one little local story like in the Gazette or something, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. I didn't think anyone would really be interested in tiny houses. But then somehow some other paper picked up on it, and then there was something like the Des Moines Register picked up on it, then Chicago Tribune, and it was like bouncing around like this, and pretty soon it kind of like took off. So, and then also over the years I've been helping facilitate this small house society and there. So as far as media, this was really helpful because, oh, here's a picture of during the tour out in California. This is a Chinese newspaper that wrote an article and did an interview, Wired Magazine, all of these. And the funniest part of it was in Better Homes and Gardens, there's an issue with my house in there as a Better Homes and Gardens model home. You know, this garden shed, you know, I thought that was really funny. So, but it was just kind of amazing to me. We spent, the advertising budget over the last 20 years has been zero. Like, you know, no advertising, and all that exposure for free was really neat, and to just kind of see it grow organically. And then, of course, more recently, these TV shows and stuff. So we already talked a little bit about challenges, and I know you're not here to hear about challenges, but basically, you just have to address these different issues. So decide what's important, get rid of the rest, or keep a storage facility for things like old family photos and things you don't want to get rid of. And then guests, you know, you meet at a coffee shop, or if it's a big event, maybe you rent one of these rooms at a hotel. And food, I didn't have a refrigerator because I was thinking, oh, maybe I'll try doing vegan food, and then I'll just eat like whatever you can shelf store, because the refrigerator takes a lot of electricity. So I thought, well, I'm just gonna, you know, have no refrigerator. So that's what I did, but if you're gonna have a lot of food and you're gonna have a refrigerator, you're gonna need more space, more electricity. And then simple clothing, like, you know, I would have the same, this is gonna sound odd, but I would have like the same socks, like all the socks were the same. It was like these wool, smart wool socks, you know, and I just throw them in a box. So I knew like in the morning it's dark and I didn't want to turn on the light, so I would just grab 2 socks and I know they'd match, you know. And so, and I had like summer shoes and winter shoes, and you know, that's a way to save a lot of space. And then amenities, thinking through like how much you want to have or how little. Housing codes. I'll go into that just a little bit now because people have an interest, which is when I set up my house in Iowa City, I put it in my parents' yard, my dad's yard, and that was near the law school, near the hospital, so kind of in a densely populated area. And my dad at first was saying like, oh, that's fine if you, because there's this big yard and it was going to be kind of separate from where his house was. It's like a forest back there. So I just put it out there, and then he started looking at the city code. And like every day I'd get an email or a phone call. He's like, hey, this is not looking good. You know, he's like, because he's going through the whole city code. He teaches law, and it's this big book. He's like, okay, I'm up to page 178, you know, and I think you're violating like 100 citation codes or whatever. And then finally he gets to the back of the book, and in the back of the book it mentions temporary dwellings or, you know, campers and RVs, and he's like, hey, don't worry about anything. Apparently there's no problem. So that was just kind of interesting, like not knowing about the housing code. I did get a call from the city though, in Iowa City, and they said there's been a complaint. And I said, well, who complained? Because I thought the neighbors were all really nice. I thought, who's complaining? And they said, well, somebody read your article, this article in the Gazette, and they live across town. Like, they don't know you, they've never seen you, they've never been on your side of town, but they just called to complain because they don't like it. And so I was like, wow. And apparently they'd gotten like a $5 ticket because their car tire was 2 inches onto their lawn. You know, so I can understand people being upset about that. And they're like, it's my lawn, why can't I park my car? And what tipped this guy off was like, how can he have a whole house in his yard and he's not getting a $5 ticket? It was one of those deals. So the city was like, well, we've got to come out and take a look, so at least it looks like we're doing our job. And they came out and they said, well, it actually is not in compliance because this house, it's an old farmhouse, which is like now right next to the hospital, but this old farmhouse, and so it has, on the corner lot, there's 2 streets. So they're 2 front yards. Because normally you just have like side yards and you'd have 1 front yard. So I couldn't have the house over here because it would be in a front yard. And there's a thing where it has to be a certain setback and all that. And it couldn't be in this front yard. So there was only one place it could be, and that would be on the west side of the farmhouse. And then there was like a drive there. So then they had to look into the law about that because there's this gravel road thing, and they're like, well, if it's a gravel road, then it's not a front yard. If it was a paved road, it would be a front yard. So it did get a little sketchy at one point, but then they were like, you know what, if you just move it over there, you're okay, we're not going to bother you. So they didn't even really go into the thing about the fact that I was living in it. And they did say, you know, technically, they're not going to come out and knock on the door every night to see if I'm there, but that technically a person should only be living in an RV or a camper or a tiny house for 30 days, and then you're supposed to like move it or something. And particularly what they don't want you to do is hooking up electric or water or anything else, which is surprising. Like, you'd think they'd want it to be more civilized or something, but they don't want electric, they don't want water for more than 30 days. And that all relates to like people that are visiting and they're in a camper and they're going to hook up water and electric to their RV. And so they're just kind of putting tiny houses in that category, just saying, well, it's kind of the same thing. But anyway, the city said, as a practical matter, there's really no way to police that. We don't have any particular fines determined. Like, we don't know what we'd do if we didn't like it anyway. So that basically was my experience with city code. But there can always, depending on the city and how much of sticklers people want to be, you know, you could be living in your house for 3-5 years and then suddenly somebody's complaining or somebody new is working at the city and now they say, oh, we don't like that. Or if there's 1,000 tiny houses, then they start saying, wait a minute, we need to do something about these tiny houses. My kitchen, I was deciding, you know, I'm just going to have this shelf-stored foods and mostly eat in Iowa City at restaurants. There are a lot of places you can get a $5 sandwich, and I thought, well, that's $5, that's cheaper than all the time it takes and storing the groceries and preparing things, I'll just get a sandwich. And this about mobility, you know, I let people know, it's like, it's a tiny house and it's movable, but it wasn't easy to move. I did an open house one time in downtown Iowa City, and you know, I had to take it off the blocks and make sure everything was settled, kind of like people do with an RV, but I just didn't want things falling off shelves and stuff, so it took like hours to get that thing moved, which isn't as easy as, you know, if somebody does decide to just live in an RV, they have those doors that kind of clip closed, and there are things that hold all the glasses. I mean, RVs are kind of meant to travel down the road, and these aren't so much. And benefits, you probably thought about these already, but, well, with mine, it was being off the grid. There were no refrigerator noises, no furnace noises, no plumbing noises, like no noises, so it's like super quiet, and I was living in this sort of wooded area, so that was a benefit. And then super easy to clean, wood floors, very inexpensive to build, and then had metal roofing, and just everything was super industrial, like zero maintenance. So that was handy, and simple intentional space where you design it for your own needs. And sustainability, this is kind of, I think, a big thing, is that there was somebody here in the Cedar Rapids area, and his family, they bought this farm, and they were gonna, build on this land. So they bought the farm, they get ready to build, they're building, and they said, well, now we need electric hookup. And so they called REC, and REC said, you know what, you're just like 50 feet away from our area, you need to call this other electric company, like Mid-American. And so they call Mid-American, Mid-American said, no, you're not covered in our area. So they're like, what do you mean not covered? You gotta be able to get electric. Nope, no electric. And then he says, well, how much would it cost to have electric? $50,000. So then he thought, oh my. And now they had the house already figured out, so they're $50,000, and they figured out it'd be less to have solar and wind. So they went with solar and wind, but that was $30,000, because the big house with electric appliances, and they needed like hundreds of batteries, and so sustainability isn't so sustainable if you're gonna live in this like 3,000 square foot home with electric furnaces and stuff. But when you're living in a tiny house, I was powering like everything for weeks and weeks on just like a car battery, and I had things that charged up, and my laptop would charge when I was at work, and like basically you hardly need anything. So that's kind of neat for people that want sustainability, super attainable. And then social, I found I was getting out more just because it was a small space, and that was a benefit, I thought. And outsourcing, so I just, instead of having my own gym and my own laundry and my own all that stuff, I would just go to the laundromat, I'd go to the gym, so somebody else was taking care of all the cleanup and the expenses of maintaining washers and dryers and things like that. And I'm sure there's other benefits each person can think of, like and plenty of natural light, which is, in a traditional home, you'll have like a room with 3 walls or just walls, and then you have 1 window. And then another room, and there's like 3 walls and a window, pretty much, unless you have like a nice big bay window. So, but in a tiny house, you have a window to the north, a window to the south, a window to the east, maybe the door to the west or whatever. You have light coming in from all over. And so it's nice to have natural light, and it saves money and stuff like that. So this space I would use as like a little dining table, but I would also work on my computer there. And it was a piece of sheet metal that was folded over that piece of wood, and then had a back plane, almost like you'd have behind a sink or something. But it was kind of amazing. And all that stuff was like, Jay had looked into that because he'd been doing these projects for people. Anyway, I just thought that was pretty neat. And then the closet was just like a door that opened, and then the shirts would go back that way, and I'd put some pants here, socks down here. So everything was in these cabinets or drawers or shelves. And then that back there is the heater. Some of this technology that's used in small house movement is from campers or cabins, or in this case, like a boat heater. So, and the thing about the boat heater is that it doesn't burn up oxygen inside of the house. The pipe that you see above that is actually 2 pipes. There's an outer shell, and then there's an inner pipe. And so the outer shell brings fresh air in, that is used for combustion, and the exhaust goes up the middle pipe. Well, then what that means is that the air coming in gets preheated because that middle pipe is super hot. So it starts to generate a lot of heat. And the first year when I was using that heater, it has a low and a high setting. So I tried the high setting, that was way too hot. Then I tried the low setting, that was too hot. It would be like 90 or 100 degrees in there. And I'm like, how am I going to make this work? Well, then I figured out one day you could, because what I'd been doing then is I just turn the heater on for 10 minutes and then turn it off for an hour. And then it was just not very efficient. But yeah, then I figured out you can have that knob adjusted like all the way down where you can barely see this like blue flame. And that was enough to heat the whole place because it was so efficient. Yeah.
Using propane then?
Mm-hmm. I get those tanks refilled, and that'd go for a few weeks. And it ended up being actually kind of expensive because those tanks, if you have a small tank, it's what, $30 or something. And if I had a huge one out in the yard, that would be cheaper. And I probably could have done better with insulation on this. It was okay, and a really good envelope, you know, in terms of like pretty much airtight except for where I wanted the vents, and I could adjust and have airflow coming in and going out, but nothing beyond that. So
I was gonna say, you're, in the years since you built this,
Mhm.
have the technologies, I can't imagine they haven't changed and really gotten much more efficient and newer
Well,
designs.
you know, it's interesting. If I had to do it all over again, I'd probably go with something similar to this, just because having the wood was really nice
Mhm.
and made it easy to work with. We used a lot of screws instead of nails, so it was like really held together well. But in terms of like the newer materials, there would be metals, or you know, people are building with aluminum. People are building. They're taking these containers and you know, cutting holes for windows and a door, and they turn a container into a house. And so you know, there are lots of different materials people are looking at to make it lighter, to make it maybe cheaper, less expense.
For summer to keep cool, they use the fuse fans.
Yeah, so there was, in one of these pictures, you'll see the loft. So the peaked roof, you can get up into this attic kind of space, but there's a window, there's light. And so I would open up that little window in the attic. Then downstairs, above that heater, I would, oh, that's okay, no problem. I would open the window just a crack at the top, and I got these computer fans from Radio Shack that would run on 12 volts. And computer fans, you know, they're quiet and they move a lot of air, and they're very efficient with the electricity. So basically I'd open that window a crack, put 2 of those fans in to get a lot of airflow going, and I set up a little switch, and the electronics are really simple. You know, it was just basically some wire, a switch, these fans, and a little bit of solder. And you wouldn't even really need the solder. So it's the kind of thing a person could just do on their own. Once that airflow was coming through, it was like all this fresh air coming through the top loft, flowing downstairs out the window. It was like constantly a flow of fresh air, and most of the time at night it's cool. And even where this was in the trees and stuff, it was well shaded. So that was like all the air conditioning I needed. Maybe there'd be a total of 7 to 10 days or something during the summer when it might have been kind of hot at night, but otherwise not bad. And this I won't go into too much, but just as for what I see, the role I've been trying to serve is working with journalists and media and people who are builders and people who are living in tiny houses and people that want to do a blog or write a book, or architects who didn't do tiny houses but now are doing tiny houses, and public speaking like today, and higher education now. I get contacted from colleges around the world that say, oh, we want to include tiny houses in our curriculum. And I remember the first time that happened, I thought, wow, this is becoming kind of mainstream. Like, if people are going to study it, if students are going to learn about this and they go on to be urban planners, it's like part of the system now, you know? So, and then local groups and pocket neighborhoods, tiny house communities, and local chapters. So, of all those things, I would say what is most interesting to me are these pocket neighborhoods and tiny communities, because there you really can have, there's one in Iowa City I'm going to show you some pictures of, where they have a common area that people can share for events and stuff. So I'm kind of looking at the clock and thinking, we're getting close. Yeah?
I've been reading with great interest, using this to solve a housing crisis,
Mhm.
homelessness.
Yeah. There's cities that are actually funding this. Up in Madison, the community and the city has gone in on saying, we're not going to worry about zoning, let's build these homes, and it's either for homeless or veterans. And they usually combine it with some healthcare services and some job training. And so like people don't stay there long. You know, they get there, they get the care they need, they get some job training, then they get a job, or they work for the organization that has this. So it's kind of a neat thing. It's not just like putting people over somewhere to give them a house to live in, but really helping them with their needs. And I think Utah eliminated chronic homelessness by 97% by doing something like that. Yeah. So I'm going to show you just a few of the pictures from some of the websites to give you an idea. But people ask how much do they cost. You know, a commercially built one can be $30,000, $50,000. If you do it yourself, you could probably get materials together for $10,000 to $20,000 and build it yourself or with friends. So that's sort of a picture of that. And then here's an example of where there's some of these campgrounds where you go and you can rent a tiny house, or Airbnb has places you can go and stay in a tiny house, which is kind of cool. And there's Jay, and this is, I went to this today because I haven't kept in touch with him. It was just, he was in Iowa City, and then after he helped me build my house, and then he was like, I'm gonna do this as a business, and I was like, cool, you know, and he moved out to California with his girlfriend at the time, and so I kind of kept in touch, but not in the last like year or so. I don't know what he's up to. Well, I went to his website, and this is an old picture of it, because if you go to his website now, it's like somebody else is doing that. So I don't know what he's up to, but anyway, he was really into this idea of having tiny house villages and helping the homeless, having these economical homes. And then pocket neighborhoods is like bigger probably than you'd be interested in, but the concept is interesting. It's like lots of little cabins in a little pocket area, and then everybody shares the park and the garden and the common areas. And Ross Chapin is the person that does that. So this is the community in Iowa City. The website does not look like much, but it's amazing what they're doing. Here's the land where they're building. So Highway 6, which becomes like Highway 1, is kind of down in this area. And if you go further over here, there's Walmart, so it's kind of in that area. This group of people, it's co-housing, they bought up this whole hill, and over here is like a park. So basically this whole hill they're gonna have gardens and also catching rainwater and stuff. And most of it's built. Let me skip ahead. So you see, as you drive in, this road goes north and south. So as you drive in here, they have some places to park your cars. So the idea is, let's not have a lot of cars going back and forth. Let's just have people walking around in this little village. And as you go in, there are these 4 homes that are next to each other, and those are pretty tiny. Those might actually be under the 700 square foot legal requirement. They may have gotten some variance for that. But here you can see that. So those are those 4 homes. That's actually an ad, I guess somebody's selling that one. Yeah, and then this is this common building where they can have laundry and exercise and events. And with this kind of co-housing situation, everyone shares meals, everyone shares rotating probably responsibilities to like take care of the lawn or something. So maybe that's not for everybody, but it's interesting, and it's something the city has said, sure, go ahead and build a bunch of little cabins and have what would have used to be called a hippie commune, So it's kind of cool that the city's bought in on it, Yeah. And it's nice also, I talked about the challenges of small living, like, well, maybe seniors wouldn't want to be on their own. Well, here, seniors aren't on their own, It's like you have seniors living with young families, and everybody's working together to help one another. And so a lot of people see that as like the future of it solves so many problems with like concerns about climate or just concerns about society in general. Like it's lots of little villages where everybody knows their neighbor and they're gardening, and it's just better for people, better for the planet. Yep.
The place you showed before this, that place.
Yeah.
Is that
That's sort of like the thing in Iowa City, basically.
but where is that?
This person, Ross Chapin, who has this website, which is pocket-neighborhoods.net, he's up in the Northwest. So yeah, those are a couple of examples of that. Oh, and I'll say sometimes this is just one example. If you'll land on some of these tiny house websites. This one's fairly high on the list in a Google search, but this person, and there are others like this where they'll say, oh, this tiny house movement is really getting to be something. I bet I could make money on Google ads. I'll set up a website, put in a bunch of ads. So just know that you're going to run into stuff like that. And a month later, maybe the site won't be around, but that kind of thing happens. But I just thought it's really too bad, because I went here to look up tiny house festivals, and it's like, this is what I saw. It was like all these ads. But anyway, it's just that kind of thing happens. But so you want to kind of be selective about what websites you're going to, and as you would with anything, you can kind of know that some are higher quality than others. Here's one, Tiny House, Iowa City. There's a Methodist pastor who set up this tiny house in his backyard. And he's not into technology or anything, but he had this event and he had a bunch of people come over. And so I took some photos and was working with him, and I said, why don't we set up a website for your house, you know? And so that's one thing I like to do, is help people start these organizations. And I was surprised that just this one person with one house, he suddenly, like, this is even an old picture, but there were like hundreds and hundreds of people signing up on his Facebook page, and you know, so that was really neat. And this is the Small House Society site. It's changed a little bit since then, but basically there it's just smallhousesociety.net or smallhousesociety.org. And then Tiny House Tour, oh, this I mentioned, going from Canada to Mexico, was, there's Jay, and then Dee Williams. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she's out
So
in...
Dee Williams is actually the sister of that guy you were talking about.
Yes, exactly.
In-
Right, because I'd known her for a long time, and I met him, and so we'd been in touch, but I didn't know the connection. And then one day I was like, oh, wait a minute, you're related to Dee. And she told me, she was like, hey, you need to, you know, talk to my brother. I'm like, oh, I know him. You know, anyway, isn't it a small world? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then this was like a workshop. Jay does these where he'll help people do designs and planning to build their own house. Here's a crowd that just kind of spontaneously showed up when they heard that there was a tiny house, and just people lined up down the street to look at the house and rode their bikes in and stuff. Yeah.
Do you still have your tiny house?
I don't. I sold mine to a woman in Pennsylvania. This Mennonite couple that lives in Iowa City, they have these outdoor garden sheds and pool houses and stuff. He had a big truck and he was like, hey, I can take your house out to Pennsylvania for you. And I guess he knew people out in Pennsylvania. Anyway, so when I sold my house, the woman who bought it, he drove it out there in the winter. I was like nervous about that, but he made it fine. And yeah, and she works with Dansko Shoes Company. Yep, and so she had it for a number of years. Then she sold it to an artist. And then the artist recently sold it to somebody else. So I'm still kind of interested to see what's happening to the house. So we keep in touch on Facebook. But, and this was fun, you know, going, stopping at Google and having an open house there with the tiny house.
So where do you live now?
Now I'm living on the west side of Iowa City in an apartment. Yeah, and I have my business is at the apartment, and then my wife and I live there. And we just had her parents visiting for 6 weeks. And so it was like all of us in a pretty small apartment. So I still get to practice with tiny living. But it's not the same as being in an off-the-grid home, you know. And then there's these events, and this is kind of, we're getting to the last slides, but you've probably heard about these jamborees where you can see homes, you can hear speakers. And this one seems to be a good one, Tiny House Jamboree, that was from 2016. Tiny Fest Midwest, and if you go to their site now, it has a bunch of stuff from summer of 2019, but I think they'll probably keep this up. And that's it, that's the last slide. So I tried to go kind of quick because I was keeping an eye on the clock. But were there some questions people had? And
No, I just read that the Cedar Rapids City Council was asking for suggestions of what could be placed in those 8 acres of flood area that they've been sitting on all this time, where that
Right.
casino was supposed to be.
Mhm.
You know, wouldn't it be wonderful if they could make a tiny house community there?
That would be kind of neat, especially if things were movable. Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
because I saw one suggestion was a park,
yeah,
other suggestions.
yeah. But 8 acres, you could do a lot with that.
Yeah, so I might try to, I have that article, I'll see who it says to
Yeah.
contact, maybe I'll suggest that.
Yeah.
Yep.
I have a tiny house and there's no electricity, you know, pretty primitive, but someday I'd like to get water there. You know, it's not gonna be feasible because I'll never get the electric there. It was like $50,000 too to get it there. So, I guess I'm just looking for different ideas about what to do for water. Or, you know, you could haul it in buckets or
Right.
electricity or, you know, because I'm going totally off grid now, and
That's-
boy, it'd be nice to shower.
I took these water jugs. Yeah. Well, yeah, if you haul it in, because that's what people with an RV do, they'll fill up a tank, and then they use that 100 gallons or whatever, and they use that for showering and whatnot. But I would bring in these water jugs, fill those up just using a garden hose, and then I had something to wash my hands, brush my teeth. You can get a lot done with just a couple of jugs of water. And then as far as bathing, well, for me, for all those years, those 6 years, every morning I'd wake up at 5 a.m., I'd do some yoga and stuff like that. Then I'd go to the gym and I'd do my workout every day.
Shower there.
And shower there. And it was perfect, you know. So I didn't need water. And then as far as food, you know, Iowa City, it's a college town. There's just so many places, multiple grocery stores, little restaurants. So,
Right.
but that is a challenge, especially if you don't want to have.
Yeah, because it's clear over by Tama, you know, I
Mhm.
bought like 100 acres of timber and put it in the middle, so there's not much.
You know what you could do is get like one of these trailers that people get to haul lawnmowers, and you could get 2 of those, and you'd have like this big water tank on there, and then like both of them, and then there'd be one full and one that you're always filling up with a truck, and then have some kind of a pump that would just pump the water from there, and then you'd have water. You know?
Can you do rainwater? Is your
Oh.
Yeah, and I could do rainwater too, but like in the winter time, you know, everything freezes and I don't have heat there the whole time. It's, you know,
Mhm.
I just use it on the weekends and stuff like that. But
Yeah, in the summer you could do an outdoor shower.
yeah, and we do that, but it's just in the
And-
winter time. It's
Even I think it makes sense. One thing I liked about my setup was I didn't have a shower, I didn't have the stove other than that little camp stove, but basically there wasn't a lot of like the heat and humidity that you get from those things. It almost makes more sense to have like a separate structure that's the shower. You know, like you go outside, you go to the shower, that way all that steam and stuff doesn't get into a tiny house.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I have read a little bit about some of the tiny houses, and they said that some of that, because they're so tight and closed
Mhm.
up, that you can have mold can kind of be an issue.
Yeah, even just your breath, you know.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Where's the John?
Outside, so.
to the right?
Oh, you mean here or?
No.
Yeah. Well, because I live close to my dad, I could always go and use the restroom there. But most of the time I was working at the university, and back then I was single, and so I was working long hours. And then I'd be at the university. If I needed to use the restroom, I could use the restroom there. Had the gym, or I was downtown. So by the time I'd get home, usually I'd already gone to the bathroom. I'm getting home. I just get ready for bed, go to sleep. Even on the weekends, I'd go work at a coffee shop or something just to get emails done and stuff. But yeah, if a person needs it, you can have outdoor, John, or compostable toilets, or incinerating with electricity that just burns everything.
I bought an outhouse, so and it works fine.
Yeah.
Did you put a moon on?
Yeah. Gotta do what you gotta do, I guess. My wife's not too keen on it either, but guys don't seem to care.
Oh, gosh. It's too fun.
On one of the slides, I mentioned vacations, and a place where we would go was in Virginia. My brother and my dad, we'd go to this cabin that was, at the time, you're a kid, you don't think about it. It's just like, oh, it's a cabin, and then there's no electricity, no water. It's just totally off the grid, but we just thought, oh, this is fun. And there's a garden, and then the toilet was an outhouse, and just a rickety one with sometimes bees and stuff, so you'd have to be on your toes. And then water, we'd go down the hill, and there was a spring with just like the best water, and just get a bucket and carry the bucket of water up and put it, there's a reservoir above the sink in the kitchen, so you just fill that thing up, and then there's your water. And so that was one of the things, like an experience growing up where I thought, oh, it'd be cool to live like that again. So, that's part of the reason I set up the sink that way.
You survived all that.
Yeah. Now I can say, like, when I was a kid, we didn't have electricity. Yeah, exactly. We had to go get buckets of water uphill, both ways.
One of your slides mentioned higher education K-12.
Yes, I think that
Can
was,
you address that?
oh, yeah.
Okay, my story being here is I'm a shop teacher for a rural district
Mhm.
east of Cedar Rapids in Clarence, Iowa. And my superintendent just recently went to a rural national convention in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And one of the presenters there was about how the tiny house movement is being incorporated into K-12, and some industrial tech programs
Yes, yeah.
are building them as a auction item
For fundraising.
or fundraiser
Mhm.
for parents whose child is going on to university.
Yeah, that happened in Des Moines. A
And
class
so
built one for.
That's my reason for being here. I'd like to speak about that.
Yeah.
So what information can you give me there? I do know not for a fact, but I believe Kirkwood and Grantwood AEA has a consortium, which I'm part of, and I believe that they built, or
Yeah,
you're
I saw
you're
it.
nodding.
Yeah, it was parks really close by.
And I'm not sure if they're building another one this semester.
Yeah, this has been happening then.
It has been happening.
K to 12, and I'll get calls from teachers and say, well, I don't know what's going on. My students all want something, they want us to build a tiny house. So it's so interesting. And so they'll have me do these, like I'll do a visit to the classroom, but remotely I'll do a Skype session, and then the students will ask questions. And sometimes it's a shop teacher where they're building one that they're going to donate or sell. And then you know about like the maker movement, people are building and tinkering with things like electronics. And then there's the whole STEAM, science, technology, engineering, and then now STEM. Yeah, STEM and STEAM adds arts in there. So there's like all this interest in like building stuff. So now the tiny house movement has kind of gotten a second wind from that. And then in Tennessee, the governor there was Bill Haslam, now it's Bill Lee. But somehow, you know, sometimes an idea gets started and then it just gets dropped with the next person. But apparently they're keeping this going. So this Governor Bill Haslam, they were looking at their finances for the state, and they realized they just had some financial trouble, and they're like, what can we do to correct this financial trouble? So about 7 years ago, he said, why don't we give all these high school students, everybody gets sort of like when Oprah says, everybody gets a car. So he was like, everybody gets college education in Tennessee. Yeah, the Republican governor. And I know you hear Bernie Sanders saying, we're like, that's socialism. But anyway, so this Republican governor, he was like, let's give everybody a college education. Well, now the businesses partnered up with these colleges in Tennessee, and they're like, look, if you've got these people learning welding or working on diesel engines or whatever, like, we'll hire them. Day one, as soon as they graduate, they have a job. Then they said, you know, they didn't want to just start handing out blank checks. So they're like, the student has to have a mentor. So then they get mentored. The mentor would help with all kinds of things, academic and otherwise. You have the business that's guaranteeing a job. So now you've got like thousands and thousands of students that instead of just sitting around out of high school, they're within a couple of years starting to earn like $50,000 a year as like right out of high school. Now there's all this extra money. So now the governor's like, wow, we've got all this extra tax space. And then all these businesses are coming in because they're like, well, there are all these educated people down there in Tennessee. So they're getting, you know, car factories. They have the biggest supercomputer in the world in Tennessee. Like you're thinking, moonshine and supercomputers. But it's like, it's really been working for them. And this thing you're talking about, like people want to have these hard skills where they can go out and they can do construction. They can do this kind of stuff. But it's really inspiring. Yeah. And so then this new governor was like, we've got to keep doing this, because like these people that would have just been poor and maybe needing some assistance or something, they're working, and now they're just, everybody's going to get college education. They're doing this now, like all the seniors, because a lot of people, you know, they finish up their career and now they can't do that anymore, and they're just sitting around. Well, now they can go back to college, they can learn some new thing, maybe how to build websites or whatever, and they start a whole new career when they're like 60, 70, you know, so it's really interesting down there. Not many people know that's happening, but so my wife and I went to visit just to see like what was going on in Tennessee. Yeah.
So do you or anyone in the audience have names, contacts I can?
Yeah, if you sign up on the list, then I can get you in touch with people, and I'll go back, because it would help you to talk to some of these educators and say, you know, Greg told me you did a class and you folks built a tiny house. And
Right.
how did that go? What were some of the challenges? So I can put you in touch
What
with
are some
them.
of the pros and cons?
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Because we have a low percentage of students going on to college, but we have a high interest right now in my school district of students going into the trades again.
Check the
Mhm.
unions.
You know, I have, and they're wonderful. The unions are so, out of the Quad Cities and out of Cedar Rapids,
Mhm.
they're wonderful. I just took the kids to a masonry day at Hawkeye Downs, and it was fantastic.
Yeah.
So there's an interest, and I think there would be an interest in building a tiny home.
Mhm. That would be great.
But the pros and cons would be obviously funding, things of that nature.
Yeah, and there's some who've done it year after year, because I'll hear from them
Right.
again, they'll be like,
Yeah.
we're on our third year of doing this,
Right.
you know, so.
And if it comes down, actually, my own take on the whole thing is, I've always been against shops at the high school level
Mhm.
building a home. You may disagree with me, but here's the reason. I'm talking a
Full-size.
full-size home.
Yeah, Habitat for Humanity.
Well, that I'm okay with, because that program, but every time a school district builds a home in a community, my thinking, it's taking away from somebody's livelihood
Right.
in that community.
Everybody's paying for that
Somebody
home.
who's making,
Yeah.
they're getting free labor from the high school students.
Mhm.
You may disagree with that statement, but then I found the tiny home, and I thought, well, maybe that's
Yeah.
I can work with my own.
It's a
belief
smaller
system.
scale
Yeah.
thing, and like you said, if you do it for fundraising, then at least it's not,
Right.
yeah.
And it does give the kids, I mean, you can give the kids the same skills on a smaller scale. It doesn't have to be a two-story dwelling.
Mhm.
It can be,
Yeah,
well, it
'cause
can be
it's-
two-story, but.
A lot of it the same, whether it's a wall that's, you know, this big or a wall that's that big, it's
Right.
like it's still
It's
a
still a
wall,
wall.
putting in a window, framing that in.
Exactly. Still the same.
Yeah, because I did have shop class in high school. I went to, when I was younger, went to a high school, it was a rural high school. And so everybody learned how to do woodwork, everybody learned how to cook. That was like in Maryland. And so we also learned how to square dance. This is like all mandatory stuff, square dancing, not in shop class. So, but yeah, so I had a little bit of like background from shop class and electronics class in high school. But that was the only thing I went into building this with, was just that basic knowledge. And so I think it is appropriate, like, you know, high school kids could get involved in it and get a real good sense of satisfaction and confidence building. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, I used to live in Brooklyn, Maine.
Sorry.
What made you decide to go to an apartment as opposed to just a small house?
Location. So I had really good luck with the city, you know, letting me live where I was at. But if we were gonna have something a little bit bigger with my wife and I, we'd have to buy land. And we did look at that. We spent a year, like, then we thought, well, let's see, we could buy land way out here north of Interstate 80, but we really didn't want to even have one car, much less two, you know, but it's like, we had the one car, well, she was working over here and I was working over here, so it's like, we're gonna have to buy another car just
I'd rather
to,
go with local.
you know,
Yeah.
just for commuting. And then also the gasoline use, like, the thing we were trying to do was have less impact on the environment. Well, now we're driving cars all over the place because we're living out in the, you know, rurally. So living where we're at now in the apartment, we still get kind of a smaller house experience. And then it's amazing, like every morning there's 5 different bus routes that intersect, like right where we live. She can go out anytime. There's this pass you get for the whole year for public transit. And there you go, and like a chauffeur to work. And even when it's like raining and 30 below and traffic and whatever, just sit on the bus, you know, check emails. So it's really nice, and that we couldn't have had with a tiny house, you know. And we looked at other things like townhouses and things, but we were just so much focused on, we really want to be in this neighborhood and kind of closer to campus and stuff, so. But, and also, yeah, I mean, that's the other thing about the house that's 10 by 7, people might think, that's a garden shed or something, you know. By the time it gets to be like one of these bigger ones that you've seen, it's like 30 feet long, nobody's gonna think that's a garden shed, and people are gonna be wondering, like, why are there these 2 people living in this house on a yard? So, yeah.
Do you know what the life expectancy of the tiny house is? Is there data out there, research?
Well, that Tumbleweed Tiny House Company, they started building these according to like RV licensing standards or whatever, so they get certified as RV campers, which means they can more easily get insurance, you can get a loan, the bank says, oh, okay, it's an RV, you know, and those probably would have a certain expected life of, 20 or 30 years maybe, I guess. And then, but with these others that are just one-offs, it just depends on what kind of materials are used. So the one that I built, or Jay built and I helped was, the metal roof, the cedar siding, that thing is solid. And then like that solid core foam insulation in all the walls, so that's like extra stability. I would think it's gonna go for like 50 or 100 years probably. There's nothing to go wrong with it.
Go to that one that had the silo.
Yes, that was at the Tiny Fest. I thought that was kind of interesting because you do get people interested in all kinds of like straw bale and stuff. So yeah. Oh, and that silo, what that reminds me of is, who's that family from Iowa State? And they do these silos. Anyway, maybe you've heard of them. They donated a lot of money to the university. But there's a family that they build these silos and they're for farms, but they also build these silos and they take them to Africa and they create housing in these villages.
Soak-ups?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. But I've always thought, like, with football, I don't want to, I know people like football, but it just seems like it's a lot about competition and fighting and this and that. And I thought it's too bad we can't have like a football game where people sort of work together to do something like build houses. So I was going past the football stadium and I saw one of these things. And I was like, what is going on? They're like, well, we're getting the Iowa State people and the Hawkeyes to work together. And these team members are all working together to build houses for the poor. And I'm like, that's it, that right there, and they still had the football game. But I just thought that's cool that they can get along and they can build these houses. And that family was there with these bins. And I was like, that is a cool idea. And they were saying these can withstand like tornadoes and lots of inclement weather and the way they're built. And you can have a fire in there and the exhaust goes out the top. And so, yeah.
I would miss having a basement. In the
Yeah.
Midwest.
It is. Either that or a root cell.
You can't transport that.
Right over.
More questions? So in case there's some people arriving in a few minutes, I'll hold the formal presentation and jump ahead to, there's a slide here. I used to, and will continue to do some teaching at the University of Iowa, but also at the Iowa City Public Library. Because, a college campus, whether it's Kirkwood or University of Iowa, it's not very accessible. People don't feel like they belong there unless they're, staff or student. And it's important to have education available to everybody. So, but when I would teach classes on Microsoft Word or Excel or whatever, I would start out and just try to get an idea of what do people want to learn in this class, because you have a small group of people and that can guide how it's going to be. So that's how I approach these presentations, is I figure, well, I'm going to find out, because it can go in so many different directions depending on what people's interests are. But a show of hands then, between these two questions, how to build your own tiny house versus I'm not going to be building one, where can I buy one? Okay, so who would be interested in learning more about how to build a house? Oh, okay, say half the group, yeah. And then who's thinking, well, I probably would just buy something. That might be easier. Yeah. So I'll talk a little about both. And then some people, have questions about zoning laws. Is that of interest too? Yep. And just kind of a point about zoning laws is that cities, particularly smaller communities, don't have a dozen lawyers in-house, don't have people that are going to just start from a blank piece of paper and write up 300 pages of city code. They go get these, generic documents. So that kind of makes it easier for people because okay, most towns are going to pretty much have the same city laws, and maybe they've added a few extras in there for their own community. But anyway, so we'll talk a little more about that. And then, some people are looking at tiny houses and they're saying, I'm going to go to Habitat Restore, I'm going to get, recycled materials, I want to do as cheap as possible, I'm trying to save money. And then other people are like, oh no, the reason I'm building small is because I'm going to build as high quality as possible and money's no object. So how many people are on the side of saying, hey, I want to just do something cheap, maybe cabin or something, and then so everyone else maybe wants to look at higher quality construction, whether you're buying or building or something, so, okay. And for you just got here, this isn't yet the presentation, this is more talking about what should I present, what should I talk about, so getting a show of hands what people are interested in. And then some people are really interested in the idea of the mobility of a tiny house. So how many people are interested in tiny house on wheels so you can move it around? Okay. And how many people are just interested in smaller home because it costs less and simpler? Okay, a mixed loop too. The thing about the wheels, which goes back to zoning laws, is that a lot of people have houses on wheels and they don't go anywhere, but they put it on wheels because as soon as you put this house on wheels, 10 minutes ago it was illegal and the city was going to issue 100 citations, and now 10 minutes later you put it on wheels and now the city says, oh, never mind, that's fine. So it's just a difference of 12 inches or something. Okay, and then there are people that think about tiny homes, and there's stuff on YouTube where they're living in a van or they're living in a camper, or how many people have heard of Right Way Trailers? Yeah, there's this company. And I remember, 15 years ago I went over there and was checking out their trailers, and they had these pretty much you could order a finished, the same kind of thing you'd see on a construction site, with air conditioning and a place to work and lights and everything. And it was like $10,000, and it was tempting. I was like, that'd be a cheap house, But howdy, welcome.
Hello. Thank you.
So are there people here who are kind of interested in hearing more about non-conventional tiny houses that would be a van or a camper, or are you mostly interested in traditional tiny houses on wheels? Okay. And then, and then size. So some people think, the average home in America is 2,400 square feet, so 1,200 square feet would be small, 700 would be super small. So how many people are in that area of, oh yeah, it's fine if it's like 700 to 1,200 sounds small to me? How many people would be interested in that? And then the other category is like 150 to 500 square feet, which is really like tiny on wheels. Okay. Okay. So that was just sort of the survey to give me an idea of who's here and what the interests are, and then I'll kind of take it in that direction.